away with no husband. And at least she won't cause trouble. The room erupted in laughter, but Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked across the hall and saw Margaret sitting in the back, face pale, her hands trembling as the ridicule washed over her. Something inside him clenched. Caleb could have refused, but in that moment, he remembered his father's words. A man is measured not by what he gains, but by how he defends the dignity of others. So Caleb rose, his voice cutting like a blade through the laughter. "Then I'll marry Margaret Evans," he declared, steady as stone. Silence fell. The matrons gasped, the daughters pouted, and Margaret's wide eyes filled with shock. She wanted to protest, to shake her head, but Caleb's gaze met hers, not pitying, not mocking, but firm, as though he were giving her a choice rather than taking one. The wedding was small, quick, and whispered about more than any other in town. Some laughed, some pitied Caleb, and some called it madness. Margaret stood in her simple blue dress, trembling, unsure if she was walking into a lifetime of humiliation. Caleb said his vows with a quiet strength, as though he were sealing a pact not only with her but with destiny itself. When he took her hand, his grip was warm, steady, grounding her against the storm of whispers around them. After the ceremony, he led her to his ranch, saying little, his face unreadable. She sat beside him in the wagon, feeling the weight of a new life pressing in on her, half praying, half dreading what was to come. The Double H Ranch became Margaret's new world. At first, she moved through it like a ghost, polite and reserved. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully, though she could hear them mutter, "Never thought the boss would wed her." At night, she sat alone in the big house, her sewing basket on her lap. While Caleb worked late in the barns or rode the fences, he treated her with courtesy but kept his distance. She thought it was duty that had driven him, nothing more, and her heart ached at the thought of being a burden. But Margaret was not a woman to wither. Slowly, she began to make the house a home, patching curtains, filling the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread, planting flowers where only dust had gathered. Caleb noticed. At first, it was small things, the way the air smelled sweeter when he walked in, the way the men ate heartily when Margaret sent food down to the bunkhouse, the way laughter crept back into a place once silent. He caught himself watching her when she didn't know, seeing the strength in the set of her shoulders, the kindness in the way she spoke to the ranch hands, the quiet beauty of her smile when she thought no one was looking. She was no burden. She was bringing life into a house that had long been empty. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains, fierce and wild. A stray colt broke loose in the chaos, and Caleb rushed out to bring it in. Margaret, without hesitation, pulled on boots and followed. Their marriage began with laughter, mockery, and scorn. Some townsfolk still clung to their bitterness, unable to accept that a man like Caleb had chosen, or rather been forced, to wed the woman they had branded an old maid for every warm smile that Margaret now received in the general store. There was also a whisper trailing behind her, and for every handshake Caleb gave in town, there was a muttered comment that he had been trapped into something beneath him. But Margaret, who had lived with the sting of ridicule for most of her life, knew how to bear it with grace. She would smile, nod politely, and walk on with her head high, leaving Caleb to marvel at the quiet strength she carried. Still, though she hid it well, each cruel remark bruised her heart, and Caleb began to feel an anger stir within him, not at her, but at the world that refused to see her worth. He found himself longing to defend her, not just with words, but with actions that would silence the doubters once and for all. The chance came sooner than expected. That summer brought a drought so fierce that the grass turned brittle and the stream shriveled to mud. Ranchers across the county fought to keep their herds alive, and many lost cattle to thirst and starvation. Caleb, who had always been a man of foresight, had prepared by digging deeper wells and storing feed, but even his supplies were stretched thin. Rival ranchers, jealous of his success, began to spread rumors that he was hoarding water unfairly, letting neighbors suffer while he prospered. The town council, already eager to meddle in his affairs, called a meeting to discuss the matter. Caleb rode in with Margaret at his side, her calm presence steadying him. The hall was full, the air tense. Voices rose, accusing him of selfishness, claiming he thought himself above the rest. Caleb, normally a man of few words, stood tall and defended his actions with measured strength, explaining how he had planned ahead, how his wells were his own investment, and how he had offered water to neighbors in exchange for fair trade. But still the bitterness lingered, until Margaret, who had sat quietly, rose to speak. Her voice clear and steady carried through the room. She reminded them all of the times Caleb had sent help without seeking credit, supplies after a barn fire, a team of men to help harvest when sickness struck a family, and meals delivered quietly when others went hungry. She spoke not with anger, but with truth, her words carrying the weight of a woman who had observed, remembered, and cared. Slowly the murmurs of discontent faded, replaced by thoughtful silence. By the end of the meeting, it was Margaret's defense, not Caleb's, that swayed the crowd. For the first time, many looked at her differently, not as the old maid, but as a woman of wisdom and heart who stood shoulder to shoulder with the strongest rancher in the county. That night, as they rode home under the starlit sky, Caleb glanced at her, his chest tight with something he had not felt in years. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Margaret smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but sometimes people only see what they want." They needed to be reminded of the truth. He reached for her hand, roughened from years of work, and squeezed it gently. "Margaret, I'm beginning to think you were the piece this ranch and my life was missing." She looked away, tears glimmering, her heart pounding with a joy she dared not speak. The drought pressed on, and the ranch demanded more of them both. Margaret threw herself into the work, not content to remain in the house while others toiled. She rode the pastures with Caleb, checked on calves, and even learned to rope strays when storms scattered the herd. The ranch hands, who had once doubted her, began to respect her grit. They saw how she rose before dawn, worked beside them in the heat, and never complained. One evening, after she helped deliver a calf during a sweltering night, one of the oldest ranch hands muttered to Caleb, "Boss, she's tougher than most of us. You picked a good one." Caleb's heart swelled with pride, though he knew it was not him who had chosen. It was fate, or perhaps God, who had placed Margaret in his life. Yet even as their love grew stronger, new trials awaited. A neighboring rancher named Silas Boone, bitter and ruthless, saw the drought as an opportunity. He had always envied Caleb's success and despised him for refusing to sell off. Pieces of the Double H Boone began sending hired men to stir up trouble, cutting fences, stealing cattle, and poisoning water holes. Caleb knew who was behind it, but without proof, the law would not act. He doubled patrols, rode the range day and night, and grew more protective of Margaret than ever. But Margaret, instead of retreating in fear, stood with him. She insisted on learning how to shoot, how to handle herself, and Caleb, though reluctant, taught her. One evening, as he guided her hands on the rifle, his arms encircling her, the lesson turned into something more. The closeness, the trust, the heat of his breath near her cheek. It broke the final barrier between them. That night, their marriage, once bound only by law, was sealed by love, fierce and tender, burning away the last traces of doubt. Boone's attacks escalated, leading to a night when the barn was set aflame. Flames roared into the sky, cattle panicked, and men scrambled to save what they could. Margaret, instead of fleeing, ran to the bunkhouse, waking the men and rallying them to action. She formed a line to carry water, calmed frightened horses, and stood beside Caleb as he fought the fire. By dawn, the barn was charred, but much of the ranch was saved, thanks in no small part to her courage. The men, exhausted but alive, gathered around her, tipping their hats with newfound respect. Caleb, covered in soot, pulled her close before them all and said, "This woman is the heart of this ranch. Without her, none of this." The sun burned down on the dusty town of Redstone, where men rode in boots and spurs, women whispered behind lace fans, and reputations carried more weight than money in the bank. At the edge of that town lived Caleb Hart, a rancher whose name was spoken with both respect and a trace of envy. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a pair of blue eyes that could silence a room, Caleb had inherited the sprawling Double H Ranch from his father and built it into one of the richest spreads in the territory. He had everything a man could want: land, cattle, and strength. But he lacked one thing the town never forgave him for: a wife. In a town where appearances mattered, the matrons clucked their tongues and whispered, "A man like him should have settled down years ago." Suitors lined up their daughters, hoping Caleb would take notice, but he refused them all. Some said he was too proud, others claimed he had no heart, but Caleb knew the truth. He had once loved a girl who left him for a wealthier man, and since then he had locked his heart in steel, swearing he would never be fooled again. Yet fate has a way of bending a man's stubborn will. Across town lived Margaret Evans, known as the Old Maid by cruel tongues. She was 30 years old, too old by frontier standards to be called marriageable. She had taken care of her ailing parents until both passed, living quietly in their weather-worn cottage with her books, her garden, and her dignity. She was no beauty by town standards. Her figure was plain. Her hair a practical brown always tied in a bun, but her eyes, deep and thoughtful, carried more fire and gentleness than most men could see. Margaret had never begged for attention, never lowered herself to chase what others called happiness. She carried herself with quiet pride, though each time she heard the snickers behind her back, a small part of her heart ached. Then came the town council's decree. A new law meant to strengthen family values was passed under pressure from local preachers and nosy neighbors. Every rancher with land exceeding a certain acreage was to be married, or the property would be taxed so heavily it could not survive. The council claimed it would ensure stability, but everyone knew it was a ploy. Wives meant children, and children meant future workers for the land. Caleb Hart, as the wealthiest bachelor in the county, was the prime target. He fought it, but the law stood firm. The sheriff, an old friend of his father, pulled him aside and said, "Son, they'll take that ranch right out from under you unless you wed, and soon." The women of the town gossiped feverishly, parading their daughters before Caleb with forced smiles and coy batting lashes. But Caleb wanted none of it. He saw the hunger in their eyes, not for him, but for his land and name. Then in a heated council meeting, when the rancher stood his ground, one of the council members sneered, "Fine then, if you won't choose one of our girls, marry the old maid, she's wasting him." She held lanterns against the driving rain, called out to the spooked animal with a steady voice, and when Caleb finally caught the colt's reins, she stood soaked to the bone beside him, eyes blazing with courage. That night, as they dried by the fire, Caleb found himself studying her in a way he never had before. She wasn't weak nor plain, she was brave, loyal, and full of quiet fire. For the first time in years, he felt his guarded heart stir. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Where once there was distance, now there was closeness. Margaret and Caleb shared morning coffee at the table, long rides across the pasture, and evenings on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills. Slowly, laughter replaced silence. One night, under a blanket of stars, Caleb finally confessed, "I never wanted this marriage forced on us. But Margaret, I'll admit, I've found myself looking forward to every word you speak, every smile you give." Her breath caught, tears springing to her eyes. For the first time in her life, she was seen not as the old maid, but as a woman worthy of love. The town that once mocked began to whisper a different tune. They saw the rancher, once cold and distant, now softened and alive in his wife's presence. They saw Margaret bloom, her quiet dignity now radiant with confidence. She hosted gatherings, helped the sick, and earned respect with her kindness and wisdom. The cruel nickname faded, replaced by admiration. The same voices that had laughed now admitted, "She suits him better than anyone else ever could." Caleb's heart, once locked away, now beat for her alone, and Margaret, once resigned to a life of loneliness, found herself cherished beyond her dreams. Their marriage, born of force and ridicule, became a testament that love does not always arrive when or how we expect, but when it does, it transforms everything it touches. And so, the rancher who had been forced to marry the old maid found himself richer than ever, not in cattle or land, but in the woman who had quietly, steadily, fiercely claimed his heart. And she, the woman who once walked with bowed head through town, now stood proud at his side, knowing she was finally truly loved. Friends, if this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the world underestimates people who carry quiet strength. But love has a way of revealing true worth. If you enjoyed this tale and want more powerful stories like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share it with others. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us bring even more unforgettable journeys to you. Stay with us, many more stories of love, courage, and destiny are coming your way. The days of spring rolled into summer at the Double H Ranch, and the once awkward union between Caleb Hart and Margaret Evans began to unfold into something richer than either had expected. Yet even as their bond deepened, the world outside their gates had not forgotten how